nice things about the sander is that the table tilts. And in its tilted position, it is extremely useful for bowl making. Now, the first thing we have to do is to tilt the table. As I mentioned before, I'm going to start out with my little angle gauge. Sticks on, very useful. Zero it out to make sure that I'm starting from a level place. And I'm going to tilt the table. Now, once upon a time, there was a handle here. Somebody broke it, threw it away. It's been replaced with a nut. So one of the things that I put in my apron is a little wrench that fits this. And what I do is I loosen the nut and I tilt the table. And let's say I'm going to do a bowl with a 28-degree angle, which is sort of typical for those bowls with 3/8-inch rings and 1/2-inch thick wood. Tighten it down just until it's tight. I had to yell at somebody who used an enormous wrench and tightened it so tightly no one could untighten it. I said he had to give a little concession to those of us who don't have tremendous upper body strength. All right, let me show you what we do with it in this position. All right. If you do a straight-sided bowl, this is a remnant from a demo that I did, but I never got to sand the outside. That wasn't part of the demo. All right, here you have this all ratty and irregular looking. And this will clean it up in no time. Let me show you how. Now, I'm not completely done yet on this, but you can see that it's starting to look very nice. If your bowl has been glued up really irregularly, you may not be able to complete all of it on the sand. You may be able to fudge it a little bit with your flexible sanding pad or a handheld sander. You know, that's fine, but this gives you a good head start. You can also use this sometimes on the rings before the glue up. But there you have to be careful that you leave enough on the edge of the lowest ring so that you can get the base on, so that you have enough wood there. All right, now, another neat thing that you can do with the table tilted is to change the angle on a blank. I find this handy sometimes when I do the base piece and I want to cut a sharp angle, but I'm finding that cutting something at a 45-degree angle can be a little dicey. If I cut it to a 35 or 40-degree angle, I can tweak it by tilting the table to the angle that I want. In this case, this was cut at, probably about a 30-degree angle. Use my little wrench, get the table to a sharper angle. Turn on my dust collection, turn on the saw, and what I've done here is I've sharpened the angle slightly. I've also neatened it. And if, as a precaution, you draw a circle, I still have my center point from when I originally drew the rings for this project, it'll keep you from going off. Sometimes with the way the grain runs, you get an optical illusion, and something that's actually round will look elongated. When you go to correct it, you actually end up distorting it. You really don't want to do that, and the more I work with these bowls, the more I give myself guide rings as reference points so that your eye won't be fooled. Now, the last thing that I'm going to show you that you can do with a table cut at an angle is to check out a bevel. This is a little blank of poplar that I use to experiment with. When we do a center ring lamination, as I did on this project, If you're trying something out, you want to see what it will look like. Once you start sanding it, that's when you're going to get your curves. And on these rings, basically what you're doing is creating an imaginary middle point here, and then sanding from that as though it were two rings. The reason we do that is if you try to match two different glue-ups, you will not get them aligned perfectly enough to get it perfect all the way around. Maybe you'll hit 6 or 8 ovals and the other 2 will embarrass you. So that what you do is you draw a line in the middle, and then you sand each half, little by little, and this will give you some idea of what this looks like. Sometimes you may want to do this first and then add on your rings. In this case, I wanted to start out with everything flush. This is an experiment. I want to see how well this works out so that I can get some consistency and repeatability. All right, so that with these little tips, and I'm sure you've found your own uses, this is one of the most useful tools in the shop. You can also, I should mention, use a disc sander for many of the same functions. The only problem with the disc sander is that it sands more aggressively on the perimeter. It's actually spinning faster on the perimeter, and you run the risk of developing curves. If you go too close to the other side where it comes up, you're going to get the equivalent of kickback. In fact, sometimes they teach about kickback using a sander to show what happens. So that also I've developed a light touch, where if I'm going to, let's say, neaten it using this, I just sort of bounce it off gently, and it works very nicely to tweak it. This table tilts also, so it can be used for many of the same functions, but it's a little harder to handle. This is a gentler machine and a little bit safer. All right, and this basically are the major uses that I make of the vertical belt sander.